In today's episode, Rebecca and I discuss the topic of pain. Please keep in mind that all opinions expressed on this podcast are solely our own. While we have extensive experience as strength coaches, we are not physicians, nutritionists, or registered dietitians. All information is intended for your general knowledge. Information provided by 5x3 Radio is not a substitute for medical advice. Thank you. Broadcasting from Baltimore, Maryland, this is 5x3 Radio, where strength is for everyone. I'm your host, Emily Sokolinski, owner of 5x3 Training, a strength and conditioning gym in Baltimore, along with my co-host, Rebecca Fishburne, founder of Cornerstone Strength Maryland. Each week, Rebecca and I will discuss the ins and outs of strength training, why there is a no one-size-fits-all approach, and why strength is so important in our daily lives. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now, on with the show. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here again today for part 3. So we decided we'd done a part 1 and a part 2 of our pain podcast, but something was we hadn't quite finished discussing everything that we wanted to talk about. And we thought a third part would kind of help us wrap up our pain podcast, because most importantly, we've talked about pain and, how MRI and x-rays are not, they don't define who you are. Pain can be in your head. Where you have pain doesn't necessarily mean that you've injured something specifically. I mean, we can rehash what we've done, but ultimately it comes down to, okay, I had a pain or I've had an injury. What do I do now that I want to get back to the gym? And that's what Rebecca and I want to discuss today. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca so she could talk a little bit about where we want to head with this discussion in part 3 of our podcast.
Yeah, put that in my lap.
Exactly. So,
okay, cool.
So go ahead.
I guess we did talk about a lot of the things that I was interested in just recapping.
Yeah.
But the sort of approach that I might take if somebody's had a surgery might be slightly different than what I might do if somebody comes in with sort of just like a nagging ache, or even like a back tweak while training. Or, it might be different if it was something that was sort of like an acute injury while training. Like sometimes like with a back injury, a back tweak, it's like not that bad when it happens, but it gets progressively tighter or more uncomfortable over a day or two.
Yes.
That's a different situation to me. And I'm going to treat that differently than if someone is benching and they feel something pop or, that sort of thing. That like would be an acute injury to me versus like a tweak. And so I think a lot of what we were kind of focusing on today is maybe more in the lines of like a tweak, sometimes maybe an acute injury. But
yeah, I think we could. I definitely have dealt with people who have come back who have, tweaked something, and after a day, it's not there anymore. Like people always come in. Like I had a client who one day her hand was bothering her, so she couldn't bench. Like she couldn't close her hand around the bar. Next day was fine. She has no idea what was going on. But all I said to her that day was, don't bench. She's like, is that okay? I was like, well, of course it's okay. You can't take the bar out of the rack. Like there's no point in benching. You could make things worse. We didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe she had bruised her hand. There's nothing there. Next day it was fine. So that kind of quote unquote injury or discomfort, who knows? It was something that was there, and the next day she didn't think about it. Then you have situations where someone clearly, let's say in a case of a deadlift, pulls the bar off the floor and they move in a way that pisses off the back, right? Oftentimes that will happen. Little facet joints just get pissed off. Well, what happens is then your back will seize up, right? It'll get tight because it's trying to protect itself from doing any other damage. That might take a while. That might take a week. Might take 2 weeks. But in a case like that, where the person clearly, they know, okay, yeah, I did something, stupid. They haven't, they've set them back. Then they've set themselves back a little bit because the body's trying to relax and calm down. So the best thing that we can do is just take the weight off the bar and, kind of ease the person back into it. So there's kind of that, I guess, an injury where someone clearly has done something. It's going to take some time. It doesn't happen. It's not like one of those, like the next day they're fine. And then there's the surgery. Someone has had knee surgery. Someone has had shoulder surgery, and they have to slowly really work, build back up. I'm probably going to do the same modifications I would with somebody who's coming from surgery, and also someone who just kind of had a tweak here and there, but it's lasting a little bit longer. I'm going to ask the person for the same feedback. How do you feel? How do things feel? What's going on? Give me some verbal feedback on what's going on in your body, because that's going to help me decide where do I go next with their programming. Someone who's had surgery is almost kind of like they're almost better off than the person who's had that kind of tweak, I feel, because they had the surgery. You know what I mean? Like,
and they maybe have lower expectations about what they should be able to do a week after a tweak.
Exactly.
A week after a surgery, it's like, okay, I'm not supposed to lift more than 14 pounds.
So a surgery is going to be like, oh, well, I'm going to go real slow because I have to. And I'm doing PT and the doctor told me this. And so the coach is going to be really conservative. Whereas a back tweak, I'm going to be conservative, but I'm going to probably push a little bit more.
Yeah.
Because I know that mentally this person needs to get back. I want them to know that everything's fine. You're fine.
Yeah. And that's probably the difference. Like as a coach, being I feel like I would be a lot more conservative with somebody who's coming off a surgery, take the doctor's advice more into account, right, versus like if you have somebody who does sort of like a run of the mill tweak while training, and it's the first time they've done it, and they're very concerned and upset, and they've gone to see a doctor.
Right.
I'm not going to take that doctor's advice to heart, I think, as much as the lifter or the client does, just because it's their first time. Like this is it, the more you sort of are around, people kind of tweak things here and there, and it's not the end of the world, and you just sort of move on. And so like the level of alarm that may raise in a coach is going to be a lot more subdued than it is for the individual who's experiencing that the first time. So that's, I guess, what I'm getting at, where I say, like, I would treat it differently. I would put more stock in the very conservative comeback from a surgery versus like, okay, so you tweaked your back last week. Let's see what you can do today.
Yes. So Diego had his comment after the last podcast was good, because it was gnawing at me that we hadn't done we hadn't touched on, okay, we talked about pain. He liked what we talked about, but he wanted to hear us discuss how we coach people through, their injuries when they return, once they're comfortable coming back, right? Once they're comfortable coming back, or once the doctor has said to them, okay, you can return to the gym, basically, right? How do we train them through an injury or how do they come back from a setback? A back tweak or a shoulder tweak or a knee tweak. Maybe it's not necessarily knee surgery. Obviously I rehabbed myself with my own my knee surgery, and I rehabbed myself the same way I would rehab anybody with any type of knee pain. And as I was making my notes, I realized the same thing I would do for knee pain is the same that I would do for back pain. But knee pain and back pain follow the same principles for me, as far as like, how do I get somebody back under the bar? So I thought we could touch upon knee pain, back pain, shoulder pain, since those are the three main ones. Elbow pain kind of is related to the shoulder, which we did talk about in the last one. But give people an idea of, okay, I had that issue. I tweaked my back recently, or I tweaked my shoulder. What are some suggestions? If I were your client, if we were your coach, this this is what we would do for you. This is what we do for our clients.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking of it not so much in terms of body part, but how I don't know, how the person came about the pain, like an acute injury versus a tweak, a mishap, like something, a misuse, like a tendonitis, tendinopathy thing that results from an issue with form, that kind of.
So if I were to help someone with a shoulder injury, let's say they have just, let's say it's just a tweak, right? They slept on their shoulder funny, or something's been nagging them for a couple days, right? And I had a client who did something to her shoulder, and she came in and she started pressing, and she's like, oh, my shoulder just doesn't, something, I don't know, something's not right. I can feel it. And she was, trying to do, we were doing the regular press, with the hip, with the bounce. So I said, well, let's just strict press. Make it nice and slow, nice and easy, and just kind of let me know if you feel anything. So she did that and didn't feel bad. I was concerned that maybe the bouncing motion was going to, upset something that was going on. We ended up just strict pressing. And this is somebody whose press needed some work. She's just a tall, slender woman. And upper body strength, as we know, is not, doesn't come as quickly for women, especially my taller women, long arms and maybe who are underweight. So we started up strict pressing. Well, the strict press took off. So we just kind of stayed with it. So it came about as to help her shoulder issue, which resolved itself pretty quickly. But then we got so far with her strict press. I said, well, let's go back to the regular press. She hasn't had an issue since, and her press is great for her. It's through the roof now. So, but if she had a nagging shoulder issue, I probably would have stayed with a strict press as long as possible. Maybe she had no trouble benching, so we still benched. But let's say she had trouble benching. Well, we would have just stuck with pressing. So let's say her shoulder was really upset, and she couldn't press overhead. Well, I would try doing a landmine press with her, right? Where I put a barbell either in a landmine being an attachment, literally having a sleeve, you can slide the bar into the sleeve and do more of a, one-armed press that doesn't go overhead. It's modified. It's more of like on an angle. Those who have seen Sully's barbell prescription book, he talks about the landmine press and that. Very good for people who don't have a good shoulder mobility and can't press overhead. You can also shove a barbell into the corner of a room and, press that way. So that's a great alternative for pressing if you can't press overhead. So if she'd had a hard time pressing overhead, even strict pressing, we probably would have just done some landmine pressing. Like pressing is pressing. Any way we can keep somebody moving, modify the movement so that eventually as that pain or discomfort dissipates, you can move back to the actual exercise that you've been doing. Does that sound in keeping with what you would do with someone with shoulder pain? I mean, this is someone who's just kind of tweaked their shoulder, not recovering from surgery. That has another.
Just like I've had an older client, I don't know, mid to late 70s with, and you've had this with your mom too, but basically like a frozen shoulder, a shoulder that's not, has really restricted range of motion. And with her, even I would back it up to that, bar. I don't know what you call it, but the bar in the ring where you're walking through.
Ring press, like the ring press, press, rips exercise modification for that. Yeah, which is great.
And so there, in that case with her, my goal was even not really so much like the strength really, but the range of motion, and getting her to a more even range of motion, a fuller range of motion on both sides. I'm using that as sort of as a warm-up exercise once we got to a point where we could put some weight on it. But, initially just even using that in the same way that you might do like a body weight exercise or something.
And for those who are listening, if you don't know what that looks like, the ring press, you can go to the Starting Strength YouTube page, and there probably you'll find the video of Rip.
And you'll probably put a link in the bottom of the podcast.
I could put a link there, so you can check out see what that ring press is. So that I want to talk about the ring press, and I'm hopefully going to have an article about this client coming out. But Steve, one of our members, he had suffered from some, shoulder issue for a couple of years. He played softball, for years and years and years when he was younger. And it's just, over time, that shoulder just started to feel really crappy. So a couple of years ago, his shoulder started to really act up, and he backed off the weights. And then eventually he got a cortisone shot, and then, he did some active release technique. So he did some PT, but ultimately back, and he would stop and start, and then he'd have back tweaks because really, he has spondylolisthesis, and he had surgery in 2013, and he's doing great on that end. But every now and then his back, kind of does its thing. He's learned how to manage that. But on top of that, he was dealing with the shoulder. So then he had the back tweaks and the shoulder. Back tweak, he knew what to do with. Shoulder was another story. He was really kind of frustrated because it was like this stop and start. Mm-hmm. So eventually he just decided to cut the pressing out completely, which is a alternative. I mean, you can certainly press lightly and do all these alternatives, or just take it out. There's no reason that if you can't press, but you can bench, well, then just bench. And that's what he did. He just completely removed the pressing from his program and focused on his bench, and did really well, worked up to a big PR for him. Eventually he would test out the shoulder every now and then. When he really got back into pressing and deciding that he wanted to get back to pressing, he started with the ring press. With that. And he got to full range of motion with that. Once he did that, he moved to an implement that we have at the gym, which is a Viking press attachment, where we attach it to a bar that sits in a landmine. That's up. It's elevated on a beam, one of the beams in our gym. So it's at shoulder. It's about shoulder width, shoulder height, right? And he used that. He used a neutral grip, and he pressed that way. Very reminiscent of a landmine press, but he could do double instead of just a single arm. Well, after he got to some heavy weight for the Viking press, he moved to our Swiss bar. We have a Swiss bar. So it helps to have specialty bars at your gym. Right. I think,
Well, and also what you're describing is switching the grip.
Exactly.
Right. And so the specialty bars allow you to switch the grip.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously you can do that if you're working with dumbbells, but the nice thing, if you've got fuller range of motion on one shoulder than the other, is that if you're using a bar, it helps to hold the weaker side to account to follow through with the fuller range of motion. And also, I mean, I've heard Sully make the argument too, which I thought was convincing, that it is a little bit more, there's a little bit more stability using a bar. You don't have a situation where maybe your dumbbell gets too heavy and your arm like flops off to the side or something like that.
Exactly. And I think that's why Steve really, he decided if he's going to get back to pressing, he wants to press with both arms, with two arms, and he wants stability. So the Viking press implement we had was extremely helpful to get him to the Swiss bar. The Swiss bar was also a neutral grip, but now he can press completely overhead. This is getting closer to the barbell press. Well, once he was able to do that and he had no pain, he went back to the straight bar, and he started with, 15 pounds or the, the lightest bar that we had. And he was doing the press 2.0. He was doing the bounce. That started to aggravate his back, which makes sense because, that press can be very hard on backs that have had issues. So he basically did away with that and then just kept strict pressing. Well, he hit a PR. He hit above his PR recently with the strict press, like 135-pound strict press.
Nice.
And that's like the heaviest he's ever done with a regular press. And he's a guy in his early 50s. But he rehabbed himself using what he knows from us, from reading Starting Strength, the coaches, and knowing his own body. And, he could tell, like, one position felt worse than the other position. But he just, and the active release technique worked. The PT was working, but after a point, it just was like, I need to do something else. I just need to either stop. And then when things have calmed down, start very slowly and really build up, from the bottom up. And he did, and he is doing great. The shoulder feels fantastic.
Yeah.
But,
so just to sort of put words to it, what he learned from you is that you find the modification that works, that doesn't produce excessive pain. Number one. You progressively overload that.
Number two.
And you are continually trying to work your modifications back to a closer, truer version of the lift.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that is key for any injury. When you're coming back to the gym, you may not be able to jump right back. In fact, your brain probably doesn't want you to jump right back into, the actual exercise. So modifications are important. Let me turn it over to you. Talk about, do you want to add anything to the shoulder? Do you want to add anything to the shoulder discussion? Because as I said with Steve, he just took out the press completely and benched. And that's something I say to people too. Well, can you bench? Yes. Okay, then we're going to bench. We're not going to press for a while. Maybe we don't press. Maybe we just focus on benching. Then once, you want to try pressing again, as Steve kind of did, he wanted to, then maybe things will feel better. Or your shoulders bothers you while you're benching. Okay, let's back off the weight. Does that feel better? Yes. So, okay, lighter weight. Let's stay at that weight for a while until things calm down, until there's no pain or no discomfort, then start to add weight again. I've done that many, many times. Worked up to weight where I could bench without any discomfort, without pain. And I stayed at that weight until one day I was benching and I could tell I'm ready to go up. And then I would slowly go up. But if you keep going up and then hurting yourself and having to reset and then try to push it again, it's better to just, as I call them, medicinal deadlifts, medicinal bench. You basically stay at the weight where things feel good until you're able to, to add weight from there. Nothing wrong with staying at that weight, adding reps, adding sets, doing additional exercises to help to complement that. So if you're benching, dumbbell benching, with weight, that again is not going to make anything worse. But I think also, being patient, that takes that, and that is the hardest part, right?
That's easier said than done, right?
That's what we're asking people. We're asking people to be patient with their bodies. And we as coaches can help that person because we're guiding their programming. Someone else who doesn't have a coach, maybe who's training on their own, they have to become their own coach. Very hard to kind of be patient with yourself because, you've seen the progress and now you have to kind of start over again. Well, that's okay. That's part of training. So anything you want to add to shoulders, or do you want to move on to talking about knees? I feel I want to kind of touch on all three, and maybe for most people, back pain is oftentimes the number one culprit. So when I rehabbed my knee, I was all excited to have my knee surgery because I got to rehab myself, which meant I would be able to help somebody who'd had a knee surgery. Kind of like, well, what worked for me? Well, this worked for me, and be able to keep the person training. Now, of course, pain threshold varies from person to person. I can tolerate a lot of pain. I had no pain with my knee surgery. I took a couple ibuprofen, I think, afterwards. But I was training the next day. Was I bending my knee and doing? No, of course not. But I had two good arms and a good leg, so I did everything I could with those body parts.
Yeah.
But I did.
Well, and that's another thing too. It's like your own body.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. But I had to still I still thought I could do something that I really shouldn't have done. And I tried squatting, not to depth or anything, but I was definitely squatting to a 24-inch box the next week. And I came into the PT and I said, yeah, I'm doing squats to the box. They're like, why are you doing that? You're not supposed to do that. It's like, no, I think I can. They're like, we really don't want you to do that. And I thought, you know what? I better listen to them. And I did. And also I listened to Darren Deaton, who is, as people who don't know, Darren's an SSC and a PT down in Texas. He's got a number of practices down there. And he said to me, Emily, don't squat. You shouldn't be doing that. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to listen to Darren, because he knows his stuff, and he's going to let me push myself if I can, he'll push me. And he was very conservative. He actually said to me, your knee surgery is far different. I would push you more if you had an ACL repair than a meniscus root repair, because the meniscus is far different than an ACL. So he said, you have to be more conservative, which I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. You think ACL tear, but you can actually still do a lot more than you can without a meniscus. So I had to be more conservative with my approach to my rehab.
So how did Darren's advice to you either reflect or differ from what your surgeon was telling you?
My surgeon told me nothing. He basically let it up. He let the PTs decide how to rehab.
Okay. Well, then how was that similar or different from what your PTs were telling you?
I didn't really go to physical therapy that much. I went like 6 times in the course of, I don't know how many months of rehab so I pretty much followed Darren's advice. And his advice was to go slow.
So you followed Darren's advice. You went slow. You did what?
I biked. I biked. He said he had people on a bike within like a week, 2 weeks after their surgery. So I started off real easy. I raised the seat up pretty high. So it was very, very slow. I didn't bend it much at all to try to gain some range of motion. And then eventually I was able to lower the seat and get to kind of a more full range of motion. So when I was able to start squatting, I did.
What week was that?
Oh God, I have to go back and remember this. I had my surgery February 19th. It was on a Wednesday. And so towards the end of the month of February, right? I was probably squatting again, like to a box by the end of March.
So like 6 weeks later.
I was squatting with my brace on, because I couldn't take the brace off until for 6 weeks, but I was squatting with the brace on, with my knee brace. And because I had pretty good range of motion in the beginning. So once as the range of motion improved, I was allowed to bend a little bit more and do a little bit, more. So I'd say pretty much by beginning of May, I was under the bar. Yeah.
So you started out with the knee brace on, doing body weight squats to a high box.
To a high box. Yeah.
Yeah. And then your progression was lower the box, work with body weight.
That's it.
Until you got to a point where you could do body weight to depth, and then you added the bar.
Yes, I think so. I was doing, I think I added some weight, like I might've been doing like some goblet squats, like dumbbells. And then once I got to like 30 pounds, I just put the women's bar on my back, and started squatting with that to the box. And that was, I really wanted to go lower, and I wanted to take the box away. And Darren was like, stick with the box, like do it a little bit longer. So again, it was because it was a meniscus root repair. It was a meniscus surgery and not an ACL. So I needed to have more time and be more conservative with that knee. And deadlifting, too, since we're talking about knees, deadlifting, I elevated the bar off the floor. So I started with a trap bar first, and had the trap bar off the floor and started with that. And then once that it was pretty clear that I could deadlift, I moved to the barbell, but I had it off the floor on like mats. I think I started with like 5 inches.
So why the trap bar as opposed to just like an elevated straight bar?
I can't remember. I think because of the knee brace. Because I was in the knee brace. Yeah.
So the knee brace was bulky enough that you couldn't keep the bar tight to you. Okay, got it.
I think I started with that because it seemed like it was just, I could step into it. And because I was doing like step ups with the knee brace on, and I
remember that.
Yeah. I don't think once I started deadlifting, once the brace came off, that was it. So I was already doing step ups and deadlifts with the knee brace and squatting with the knee brace on, once I adjusted it so that I could bend my knee. But I just worked myself down to the floor slowly, with the bar, and started with very, very light weight and very, picture perfect form. The knee was fine. The knee felt great. I never had any knee pain. The only time I hurt my knee again after surgery, this was the beginning of June, I was doing step-ups, which I was told to do because it was part of my PT. And I thought, well, these are kind of easy with body weight. I think I'll add 15 pounds. So I held on to a 15-pound dumbbell, blew my knee up for 2 weeks. It swelled up. I freaked out. I called the doctor, got up there early. He said to me, "You're fine. It's okay. Nothing, you haven't done any damage. Don't do anything that bothers it." So obviously step-ups were not a good idea. Lunges were not a good idea. Split squats were not a good idea, which I was told had to do in PT one day. Like PT destroyed me. PT would destroy me. And then I go in the gym and I'd squat and deadlift and I felt bad. And I felt so much better.
Well, what was it about PT that didn't sit right?
They were having me do exercises that my knee was just not, I wasn't strong enough for yet. Like trying to come off the floor from a kneeling position, like come off the floor, like be in a kneeling position and lift my knee off the floor. Like I couldn't do certain things because my glutes and my hamstrings, my quads, I definitely still don't have nearly as much muscle on that left side as I do on the right side. There was atrophy. It had, pretty quickly. So I thought to myself, there's no way in hell I am never going to not strength train, because just even 6 weeks of like not doing much for my leg, I was like, look at my poor leg. Where'd my muscle go? So, but fast forward to a year and a half, and I'm doing lunges and split squats and step ups, like no problem. But at the time,
so that's interesting too, because it's like the step up and the lunge are both single leg exercises. So, maybe there's something there also to the idea that the stronger side can help support the weaker side
I understand the thinking with the single leg work, and I did a lot of single leg work, and I do a lot of single leg work. But I needed the squatting, and the deadlifting to really help rehab myself. And then, once I got back into it, I can do plenty of single leg work now, but there are definitely things that bother it. I threw in some ski hops into my Zoom class, right, a couple weeks ago, little like side to side jumps, fucking blew my knee up. Sorry. I forgot we were podcasting. My knee blew up. I was like, God damn it, and I've been doing fine. I'm like, what did I do? And it was the little ski hops. It was something as dumb as that my knee was like, we don't like this. Stop that. You're 46 years old. What the hell are you trying to, prove to yourself? So stop that nonsense. Just stick with the stuff that keeps your knee happy. So after a couple of days, it was fine, but it blew up and it swelled up, and I couldn't straighten my knee. I couldn't lock my knee out, so I couldn't press. It was, and I knew it was just from that. And then I never do that. I'm never going to do that again. But I can do jumping jacks. So in regards to knee, so if I'm rehabbing someone with knee pain, surgery wise, I'm probably going to work with them the way that I worked with myself and be very conservative, and also address what they're doing in PT, if they're doing physical therapy. And I probably would even reach out to some of our PT friends. Like I probably would reach out to Darren. I have done that in the past. Like, I've got a client who's dealing with this. This is what I've been doing. Do you have any other suggestions? So I'm not going to pretend ever that I know that I know everything. That's why we're all talking. We all talk with each other all the time and try to, come up with, good solutions to somebody. But a very simple thing to do if you're having knee issues, which then could also aggravate your hip as well, because we start to move funny when we have issues. You go slow, you take the weight off, you start with body weight, you start with an elevated box, you make sure form is picture perfect, you make sure nothing hurts until and then when that happens, then you can start to lower the box or add the weight. And I always adjust the weight. So if the box starts to get lower and the weight has gotten higher on the bar, I may take the weight down because now they're getting lower. So we're going to keep balancing, have that balancing act.
Range of motion versus weight on the bar. Yeah.
Right.
Because the increased range of motion is an increased stress.
Right.
That's adding, like that's a form of progressive overload. So yeah, you balance between the two. Yeah. So what you're describing, building from basically from surgery from 0 up, is a little bit different than what might happen if you've got somebody who's like got knee pain.
Yes.
From, I mean, I guess the two places where I hear about knee pain or knee issues most often is like if it's like sort of like, I don't know, like patellar tendon from knee slide, or arthritis, are the two other things. That's and so, yeah, in that case, instead of building from 0 up. And so, you've got somebody who's got like, I don't know, say like a 225 squat. You're not going to say, okay, well, we're immediately going to go to a body weight squat to a high box. You're going to work down. How much weight do we need to take off to address the issue? You've got to like figure out what is the source, right? Like, so if it's arthritis, that's one thing. If it's a form deviation, how much weight do we need to strip off the bar to address the form deviation, correct that, give the tendon some time to settle down, and build from there. But the other thing too that I've found with knee pain that's like osteoarthritic, is there's similar to like with back tweaks, right? There's a fear element. Yeah. And the thing that people get their head stuck on is this idea that they've lost the quality of the connective tissue in their knee. There's no cushioning there anymore. They're bone on bone. They're grinding things down. And so there's like some fear-based misinformation, I guess. And like Austin Baraki has some nice articles that address osteoarthritis and knees. And it sort of helps talk people down off that ledge that have been helpful, because those are some pieces that sometimes also need to be addressed with knees, or also like with shoulders. People get the idea like, oh, if I press something over my head, I'm going to saw my tendon in half. I had somebody tell me that once.
Lovely.
Yeah. My doctor told me if I put things over my head, if I do overhead presses, I'm going to saw my tendon in half. Yeah. I mean, I didn't really get into her medical issues or whatever. Like maybe she had something unusual, but that sort of imagery gets dispensed pretty easily. And the damage that does in terms of a person's willingness to move is pretty profound.
I know when it comes to arthritis in the knees, because I have a couple people who deal with that. That is where I'm very, very, I let the person decide what they want to do. That's one area where I don't push, because we have sleds and we have prowlers, and we've got harnesses and we've got the straps. So, and we've got a yoke people can push, which I've pushed before for my own, when I couldn't squat for my back. And I pushed it recently because of my hip. My hip was bothering me. And you get a good leg workout. You get your quads and your hamstrings and your calves get worked with that. And if the person is willing to do that work, they don't care that they're not squatting. And they sit down in the toilet and they stand back up and they go up and down stairs, but they're dragging that sled up and back and they're adding weight to that and they love that. I'm all for that, because I've got them in the gym. I've got them moving. They're pressing, they're benching, they're deadlifting. But their knees right now, they're like, I really just don't want to push my knees. And I'm going to say, you know what? That's fine. When you're ready to try again, we'll try again. I've had a client who will do body weight squats to a box. But that's about it. I don't care. I don't push it. She pushes the prowler. She squats. She benches, she presses. She does a whole bunch of stuff and she's happy. And her knees are okay. I've never heard her complain about her knees since. And she does plenty of walking. She's on her legs all day. She's a pharmacist. So that is, do I wish that I could get them to squat? Because I'm sure it would make them feel better eventually. Yes. But because they're alternatives and those alternatives they're willing to do, because they don't have it in their mind. Well, if I'm not squatting, I don't want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that. And I don't push it because I know that there are other ways to get their legs stronger. And
I in that situation, like, and especially when I'm doing like online coaching, I don't always have those sort of options.
Right.
And so generally I approach that by like providing the information that helps dispel the fears, cutting back on volume, right? So maybe 3 sets of 3 at a top heavy instead of 5s, cutting back on volume day. So instead of 5x5, maybe it's 4x5 or, something like that.
Yeah.
Taking some reps away here and there throughout the program. And, if there's an issue that's form related, also trying to address that. But I've, one client recently where like I sort of pointed her to these Baraki articles, and literally like the next session that she sensed, she's like, my knees feel 1,000 times better. And she was like, I read those articles and I feel better. And it was like, you could tell because the language was like catastrophic, what she thought was going on in her knees.
Right.
And it was very much tied with her mother's medical history with her knees, like as if, this is inevitable and I'm going to have a knee replacement. And maybe she will, maybe she won't. I don't know. But, read what this doctor has to say about it. And don't assume that just because something was true for somebody in your family that it's going to be true for you, because you're living your life differently. You're using your body differently.
Right.
And just sort of ratcheting the fear down a little bit did a whole lot to her perception of her knee issues.
And I think you have to know the person too.
Yeah.
Like you have to know, because you could give that article to somebody and they read and they go, and they still don't want to do, and you're like, okay, that's fine. We have an alternative. We can do something else. Yeah. My biggest, my goal is to keep the person training.
Right.
And if I can keep them doing, 3 out of the 4 big lifts and make the deadlift their main exercise, I'm doing it.
Yeah. And I've done that too, where it's like, okay, bench irritates your shoulder. That's fine. We won't bench right now. We're just going to squat, deadlift, and press.
And I think what I want to say, to people who are, worried, well, if I can't squat, what's the point? So you can't squat. There's 1,000 things you can do. If you can leg press, if Jim has a leg press, if you can do a split squat, if you can lunge. I mean, there's so many other alternatives to legs other than squatting. Sure, we like it. It feels good. It's the king of lifts, yada, yada, yada. But, and I, as a strength coach, when I can't squat, I'm like, God, I can't squat. I like it. But I also know that there are other alternatives. And I've embraced those other alternatives because I know that I'll be able to eventually get back to that lift if I don't push myself to the point where I re-injure it.
To the point where you have a meniscus root.
Yeah, and I have to go for another surgery. So I think it's like Diego says, well, are you a power lifter? Do you have to bench? You're not a power lifter. You don't need to bench, So if bench bothers you, find something else to do. But that takes us to say to the person, it's okay that you can't do X, Y, or Z because there are other alternatives, and let's do these right now. And then let's see if we can get back to that exercise, because, if you really want to do it, I want to get you back to it, but I don't want you to constantly be in this, circle of pain, coming back to it over and over and over again.
But the other thing that you're mentioning, that you're talking about, is also like a mindset issue. Absolutely. Like basically essentially like a growth mindset.
Absolutely.
Right? Just because squatting or pressing or whatever the movement is doesn't work right now because the pain level is 5 out of 10, or you've just had a surgery or whatever, that's not the rest of your life. That's your current situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right now. That's, it's not forever.
Yeah. And that's hard. That's where the patience comes in, being patient with yourself, right? Which is so hard. Right. Unless if you have someone like you or me or Jay or, any of the coaches, you have somebody who's there to program you, to guide you, to encourage you, to say, hey, you're doing great. This is a great day today. Next time we're going to do this. But if you're doing that on yourself, if you're doing that yourself, it can be very frustrating and very, hard to be patient. You're impatient. I made all this great progress. Now I can't do this. Now what do I do? Well, there's a lot you can do, but you need to know those modifications. I had a client who was with us for about a month. He came in, he wanted to do some training. He did 4 sessions with Diego, and then he did a month, 3 times a week of training with us. A great guy. And he lives a little too far to be a regular member, they're week in, week out. So when he finished, we sat down, talked programming, and he was recovering from some shoulder issues. So we were really keen. We were really focused on like the pressing and the benching. And I've heard from him a couple times. And just recently I heard from him because his knee and hip were bothering him. And then his back started to bother him. He's an older guy. He's in his 50s. Well, that was because of probably
Emily, that's me.
You're not in your 50s. You're 50. Shut up. I don't think of you as that. Sorry. You to me, you're still the same age as when I met you 6 years ago.
Which was in my 40s.
So you're a young woman, a young middle-aged woman. So that and I thought to myself, okay, the knee and the hip, most likely that's why the back pains hurts. But he said, he hurt to breathe. And I thought, I bet you anything, it's either an intercostal muscle or it's a rib, because Diego's had that before, where like you try to breathe and you can't, right?
Right.
And
I had that from my belt.
yeah, exactly. And he's not wearing a belt. So I gave him some feedback. I said, listen, this happens. Give it some time. And I said, number 1, keep moving, because he stopped squatting and deadlifting, and the pain got worse because he just probably stopped doing everything. I said, number 2, keep it light. Number 3, don't panic. That's always a thing.
Right.
Don't panic.
Right.
And he got back to me and he said, the doctor saw him and it's a fractured rib. I was like, that was going to be my second guess, was the fractured rib. He's disappointed. He's made all this progress. Now what? I'm like, it's okay. This happened. Good that you know what it is so that you can actually take the time to do what you need to do to rest it, as the doctor said. And when he said to him, he wanted to get back to lifting, the doctor's recommendation didn't change. It was like, give yourself 2 weeks. He said, well, I want to get back to lifting. He goes, okay, give yourself 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So that was,
well, and the other thing too, I mean, like we're sort of talking about, I don't remember if this was before or after how it's getting cut and pasted, but like the benefit to having a coach who's seen more things is that a coach's level of alarm at like a back tweak is going to be less than the person experiencing it for the first time. Similar situation here, where if you have someone who's worked very hard to get to the point that they're at, and then they have a cracked rib, right? They think they're going to have to go through the exact same thing again to get back to that place, without sort of realizing that it's a little bit faster to build the strength back. It doesn't take the same amount of time. So this sort of, I don't know what you call it, like worst case scenario or catastrophic thinking is something that is very common, especially if it's the first time you're experiencing something. That is 100% what made my back tweak the first time I was barbell training, like the first time, like much worse because I catastrophized it and then my body responded accordingly. But if you have a coach or lift buddies or, whatever, people have been there a while longer that can kind of give you some perspective. That definitely helps the recovery process.
And that's what I said to him. He said, when I get back to deadlifting, I want to come in and see you. I don't want to do this on my own. I said, that's fine. But I can tell you, I can give you exactly what to do to get back to where you were. I mean, you basically, like I had a client who tweaked his back, and when he came in, he knew what he had done. He was lowering the bar incorrectly, or no, I think he might have pulled the bar kind of and rounded his back a little bit. He was fine, but it hung on for a while. He came in, we tried a deadlift. I watched him try to get down to the bar. He couldn't even get down to grab the bar. Right. So we knew right away we had to elevate it. So we elevated it. Even that was bothersome. So then we elevated even more. We basically did rack pulls. We had the bar right below his knee. I think before we did that, we started with RDLs, just getting him to hinge. Just getting him to hinge, put his hands on his thighs and slide down his hands down his thighs, just hinging his hips back, just to get that movement into his body.
Yeah.
We started with that. Then we put a bar in his hand. Then we pulled from the rack. I mean, it was like one of these, like we worked all the way back down from below the knee to the floor. And I said to my client who's emailed me, I said, I can tell you exactly what to do. You figure out, can I get to the floor? Can I deadlift on the floor? I can't. Okay. The next step is bring the floor to me. Bring the floor to you. Right. Same with he said I could probably start squatting again. I said, that's great. Find a box that you can squat to where you're just at parallel.
It's the same concept. Bring depth to you. Like if you can't get to depth, you get the higher box. You bring the depth to you.
Bring the depth to you. So it's the same. And then you slowly work down. You work down from there. You work from where there is no pain. And then each time you go a little bit lower and a little bit lower. And then if you experience something, you bump it up and then you start to go back down again. It's almost like, I'm not going to say it's magic, but it's how many times do we do that? And it's like, we get the person right back to where they were. And it doesn't take that long either, because after a while, the body starts to relax. The brain starts to relax. It's like, I'm back in position. And also everything is, I say, picture perfect. I don't want to see a deviation from that model, from the way that you squat, the way that you're supposed to squat, or the way that you're supposed to deadlift, not that person deadlifting, but you and your body. I don't want to see anything. I want you to go slow, and I want you to go, I want you to not add weight until you don't feel a thing. And it always works. And they come back a lot stronger and a lot faster. And oftentimes we've also addressed a lot of bad habits that had filtered into their training over time. And those bad habits have now been removed. And all of a sudden that's what the deadlift should look like. That's what your squat should look like. It looked like that in the beginning when we first worked with you. And then over time, there's been deviation.
The only thing I would say slightly differently is I would stay away from the wording till you don't feel a thing.
Okay. Yes.
Right. Because
not
some
too much
people
discomfort. Yes. Good point.
Right.
Good point.
Because like if you're talking about that VAS scale, something that's like a 1 or a 2, somebody might call that pain, whereas I would call that tightness or stiffness. Right. So tightness, stiffness, something that feels slightly off is not the same thing as nothing, feeling nothing.
Yes.
But that's okay to work through.
Yeah, it's that. What will I say? Is it sharp, stabbing, shooting pain? No, because that's a 10. That's a 12 in my book. Sharp, stabbing, shooting pain that takes your breath away when you move. Is it that? No, you're fine. But if I can see a grimace, if I can see the movement quality, like it's not like I can see that they're deadlifting weird, weirdly. I mean, I can see the movement. I said, there's something going on, isn't there? Well, yeah. Like you got to tell me, like, especially people who can tolerate a lot of pain, like Kelly, who can tolerate a lot of pain. I watched Kelly deadlift when her back was bothering her, I'm like, what are you doing? It's like, well, my back. I said, stop. Or do RDLs feel okay? Okay, do RDLs. But what you're doing is not a deadlift. It is, I'm trying to deadlift and get away with deadlifting while my back is acting up. And I called her on it, and she agreed, and she stopped, and we did something else. We did a modification of that lift. And that's being able to do that, for your clients. And, people who don't have coaches, who train on their own, you need to learn how to pull out, like from your back pocket, those modifications. Reach out to people. Don't try to go on this alone. If you know a coach or somebody who knows somebody, ask that person. Don't try to figure out, well, what do I do? And also just don't stop. There's this kind of throw up your hands and, well, I guess I better just, rest for 5 weeks, before anything gets better. there's a balance. There's that balance. So yes, the no, doing something until you feel nothing. You're right. You should feel something. And it's okay. It's that kind of scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah.
Where are you? You know?
Well, and along those lines too, about not feeling anything, right? It seems like, I mean, and maybe, I mean, you've probably had more experience with this, because like I have a lot of clients who are already in their 40s, 50s, or 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But one client in particular who's like early 30s, and like at a certain point, 25, 35, things start to feel different. Like
Mm-hmm.
your body changes, you feel
Mm-hmm.
different in your body. You're not like a teenager anymore.
Right.
And understanding how your body might feel differently and interpreting that as pain,
Mm-hmm.
and interpreting that as something that you need to avoid,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes also is something that like it helps to have somebody else talk you through.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I think like we've kind of talked about, so we've talked about backs and deadlifts.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about knees and squats and
Mm-hmm.
single leg exercises. And we've talked about shoulders and pressing, shoulders and benching.
Yeah.
But like the basic principles for all of those that we've covered
Yes.
is if something is painful, right? Not necessarily tight, right? But it's painful, and it's from, maybe it's from an injury, maybe it's from tendinopathy, maybe it's from a form issue that led to some pain, something like that. Not necessarily like a surgery where you're building up from ground zero, but something that's painful to a point that it's not smart to keep forging ahead.
Right.
The first step is you bring the weight down till you find a weight that you can do the exercise where it's not producing that level of pain. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's a little stiff or a little uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of build up from there and focus on your form. If you can't take the weight down, or you can't do the full range of motion, find a modification that you can build on. And then sort of do that titration between range of motion or the modification and the weight. Yep. to bring yourself back to a point where you're doing the exercise at a comparable weight, but without pain and with hopefully much better form. Mm-hmm. That's not gonna lead to further issues.
Good recap. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and it's like the way you modify that. It's like sometimes people just don't know, like, wait, I can do an elevated deadlift. That's a thing.
Yep. Yeah. I think it's, that's where it's important to have, oftentimes have a coach or have somebody that, you can reach out to, because, what would years ago before, if I knew something hurt, I would just stop. Just don't do anything. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to do. I've always said that's the one wonderful thing about strength training is if you're a runner and all you do is run and then you can't run, what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, there's your identity.
That's your identity. If you're a cyclist, and you can't, and you haven't been strength training, for your sport. Whereas strength training, oh my God, like my gym's a candy store. I got sleds, I got prowlers, I've got, Viking implements, I've got kegs, I've got sandbags, I've got, safety bar, a safety bar. I've got a camber bar. I mean, there's like, oh, I can't do this. Well, we'll squat with this. Okay. Well, I can't do this. Well, that's okay. We'll deadlift with the mats. Oh, well, I can't, like, that's all right. Can you do rack pulls? I mean, I had one of my clients, and he'll hear this podcast because he listens to us. He's having a lot of knee pain, Jesse, and deadlifting from the floor bothers him, and back squatting, low bar back squatting bothers him. So we finally figured out, well, he can do a goblet squat. That feels great. Okay. Well, we've got a safety bar. Very similar, except the weight's on your back and not in front of you. Fantastic. You can squat now. Well, what about deadlifts? Rack pulls. Oh, I can do rack pulls? Well, yeah, you can do rack pulls. I mean, you got a heavy deadlift. We'll just do heavy rack pulls. So he'll just come in and he'll set himself up on the rack, and he's got his, he's got they got the safety bar there, and he's got the straps for the rack pulls, and he's now back to squatting and pressing and rack and deadlifting, all modified until that knee calms down. And eventually it will, as long as he doesn't keep pushing it the way he was. He was doing the box and he was doing this. It was just like he just needed to change up his squat, change up his deadlift. So, but it was up to me to say to him, okay, knock it off. You're just beating your head against the wall now. Let's figure out what doesn't bother you. We tried front squats. We tried back squat. We tried the high bar squat. We tried the safety bar squat. Okay, we figured out what it was. Okay, deadlift. Can you rack pull? And if he had said he couldn't, then we wouldn't have done that, but felt fine. It was something from where he got too low, right? Where he had to be in a position where the knees were in such a, position where they hurt. And they really did. And he's not one to complain about stuff. No. So when he says something bothers him, it's okay, we got to make a change. But that's, you're not going to find that those kind of equipment. I mean, sorry, you're not going to find those pieces of equipment or straps or at a regular gym.
Right. And that's the thing I'm thinking about just in general. Like you've described some particular bars or apparatuses, and I'm also in a commercial gym. Well, there's a landmine press. So somebody who is in a commercial gym who needs to modify their overhead press, maybe there's going to be a football bar. Like the gym I work in has a football bar. So, someone could use that, switch their grip up. There's a landmine press. There's not a Viking press. So the progression of modifications might be a little bit different. But the concept is still the same. I think most gyms have plyo boxes. People don't always realize that you find the appropriate height for you using a plyo box and a bumper plate. Right. So if the 12-inch box is lower than you can go without experiencing some kind of notable pain, then you raise it up by putting, maybe you put the 15-pound bumper plate on there and you give yourself an extra inch and a half, whatever that is. If that's not enough space, you put the 35-pound bumper plate on and give yourself 2 inches, or the 45-pound, and give yourself 2.5 inches. So you can adjust the height of your plyo box at your regular gym by using the bumper plates. How you do that with an elevated deadlift in a commercial gym. I mean, you are doing that at 5x3 by using extra pieces of stall matting. So the stall matting that you didn't use to cover the surface area of the floor, it's piled up and people use it for deficit deadlifts or for, whatever. But in a commercial gym, you would probably go right from a regular on the floor. Maybe you would try a trap bar deadlift and see if that made any difference. But you would probably just go to the lowest position that you could put your safety arms in your squat rack into and do not necessarily a rack pull, but as low as you could get
and I've used
the
that,
bar.
And I've used that too. I put the safety bars low on on the power rack, and had people pull from that. So we've got the tiles. They're nice tiles from the Strong Woman stuff. So we use those. They're really thick.
Right.
We use those. But the safety arms at the squat rack, they'll do just fine. Or if the commercial gyms have steppers, for a step aerobics class, those are perfect.
If it's a lighter deadlift.
The two. But I mean, I think for the steppers, that's good. You just have to elevate it just somehow.
Because I've actually used those in a gym where we didn't have a light enough bar, before we had a 15-pound training bar, or before we had the Bella bar or whatever, just had a 45-pound bar, and that was as heavy as I wanted it to be for someone, a woman that I was working with who was in her late 60s. But I needed it to be the appropriate height, right? There were no 5-pound bumper plates. I wasn't going to toss 10 pounds on there and give her a 65-pound bar to start out with. So I've used those stepper things to raise the bar up that way as well.
I did that way back when I was, one of my girlfriends allowed me to coach her. This is before actually we were doing starting strength. I was just trying to coach people. And we used we basically had the aerobic step there, and she kind of pulled from that, put the bar up on top of the step. So, there's some creative ways you can bring
in a commercial gym, you got to think outside the box a little more.
absolutely. I mean, the nice thing about
in a strength training gym, hopefully you've got all the stuff you need.
Yeah. And you have people there who know how to use it and how to kind of progress you accordingly.
Right.
Steve knew just what to do. He knew he had all the equipment. So he just decided to go at that approach with guidance from us, kind of, cueing him along the way. But yeah, I always say the most important thing with coming back from an injury, from a surgery, is just to go slow. And, if you need to reach out to somebody to help to figure out what modifications do you need to make, if you have to make them, most of us who are lifting are part of some community. I mean, I see the Facebook pages, right, of people who are asking for feedback. That's a community right there. So there's somebody who would easily say, hey, I've got an issue, and someone's going to respond to them. Probably somebody who's done it before because they worked with a coach, or a coach is going to respond. There's plenty of information out there. There's plenty of people giving free information, to people who need guidance, because that's really what it comes down to is guidance. I'd rather somebody keep moving than not move at all. Right. That's the most important thing. But what does that
and
look
what you
like?
can do.
But what does that look like? So I hope that in this podcast, we were able to provide some good information as to where to go coming back from an injury, or, from a tweak, or even how to begin after a surgery. That, of course, is in conjunction with your doctor and your PT, but definitely our own experience has been what we've, talked about in today's show. I think that kind of wraps it up for me as far as, what I do. It's pretty simple, but a lot of the same things are done for any sort of, injury. Patience. I'm going to keep coming back to that because it's so hard to be patient, but patience, and not panicking, because we've all been there. We've all been there. We've all gone through it. A lot of it has to do with your mindset. Yeah. Anything you want to add before we close out today?
Got nothing. I'm all talked out.
I'm done too. It's the end of the month, at least almost the end of the month.
It's the end of the week for sure. It's Friday.
Yeah. So this is gonna come out. I'm gonna put this out, next week, and Craig's interview will be a couple weeks from now.
Oh, gotcha.
Because I want to bookend. I want to wrap up the pain thing. I don't want to skip and then come back to it. So I know we talked about interviewing Craig, which was a great interview. So look forward to that. I look forward to putting out that interview in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I think I learned like 18 new things.
I learned so much, and I know we need to talk more to him. I've got to go. It's almost 4:00. I got to get back to the gym, but I think we wrapped up nicely. I think this is good. If Diego has any feedback for us, then fine. He can do his own podcast next time.
That's probably what we need to do is interview Diego.
He will never do it. But we can ask him. All right.
If we get enough people on that.
I do have to run. Everybody was quiet in your house, by the way. So.
Oh, I heard lots of doors slamming and people having like side conversations with me, and I'm like, go away.
I heard nothing. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. And we will be back in a couple weeks with our interview with Coach Craig Brooks. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Awesome. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to 5x3 Radio with Emily and Rebecca. If you like our show and want to know more about 5x3 training, please visit us at www.5, that's F-I-V-E, the letter X, the number 3.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. To learn more about Rebecca, please visit her website, cornerstonestrengthmaryland.com. Thanks for listening and have a great week.